In this video, I'm going to create a one-point perspective grid in Photoshop. This is for purposes of illustration. This is if you need to draw a one-point perspective location. So I'm not going into detail on what one-point perspective is, but rather how you create a grid that's useful to you in Photoshop. So this is my canvas. This is a 2500 by 1250 pixels, a 2:1 ratio canvas, the kind that I use a lot for conceptual art and things like that. And what I'm going to do with this is create a grid around it so that I can then build a room inside of it, build an interior inside of it, or even an exterior. This is going to start with increasing the size of the canvas. Whenever you're creating a one-point perspective grid, it actually needs to be larger than the canvas that you have. So the easy way to do this is it's actually built from your alternate color here, your background color. So I'm going to go down here and double click on this further back color. And I'm going to turn it to a gray, hit OK. When I increase the size of my canvas, it's going to change to whatever that background color is. So I'm going to go to Image and Canvas Size. And I'm going to set it to pixels so I can see my current size. And what I have right now is the 2500 by 1250. And what I'm going to change that to is, we're going to throw on 1000 pixels on either side. So 3500 by 2250. And what you'll see is this. It increases the size of the canvas. I now have some space to work around my image. Now you would actually want to go a little bit bigger than that if you can. It depends somewhat on the resources of your computer and how big the actual canvas is. If you start to get too large with canvas size, it will slow down and bog down the computer. However, the larger you can go, the better it is because you get less distortion around the edges of your grid. Which you're going to see that happen when I put this together, because this isn't quite enough, but it's enough to get by with. So here's what I'm going to do first. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to grab my line tool. So the line tool hidden underneath the shape tool. I'm going to make sure it has a fill and no stroke, and that the weight is about 2 pixels. 2 pixels is fine. I'm going to draw a horizon line, assuming this is where I want my horizon to be. And I'm going to do it properly where it actually goes all the way across the image. The first time I did it lazily. Alright, so this is going to be my horizon. I'm going to choose a vanishing point, which I'm just going to break out my Wacom tablet for this. I grab a brush and I'll just make one pretty much dead center there. That's going to be my vanishing point. I'll put VP next to it so I know that. And then back to my line tool. The idea here is to figure out, okay, that's my vanishing point. That's where my camera is pointed. That's the spot where my camera is pointed. But then we have to establish a station point, which is where the tripod is sitting. Now we get this as put together as well as we can, but the further down you go, the better filled you get so that it's not distorted. I'm really terrible at describing it, but anyway, what I'm going to do is draw a line straight down and get it as low down as I can here, and that is going to be my station point. This is where, as a reference, this is where my tripod is sitting, so station point there, so SP. And then what I do from that is these become something to help me measure a little bit later on. So first things first, I'm building a tile floor. We'll do that for example. I'm building a tile floor here. So I'm going to create just a little rectangle that shows me exactly how wide that tile is going to be. So something like this. Here's my rectangle. And I would know that I could use my vanishing point to put those corners in. I'm going to do that here in a minute, but I want this to be a tile floor, and since this is one point perspective, all these are going to be in a horizontal line across the image. So I'm just going to take that little rectangle I've created and use Command J and basically just start duplicating. I'm going to leave a little gap in between there just so I can see in between them. And inevitably Photoshop even helps me line it up equally as long as I have Smart Guides turned on. But I'm just going to build these out till it covers the entire width of this canvas. So now let me grab those, shift them, there we go. It covers all of my canvas there. And I'm also going to merge those down so that I don't have quite a as chaotic of a layers palette. So I control click on the name of them when I have them all selected, and then merge the shapes. So this is my tiles. Now what I can do is go back to my line tool. I'm actually going to change the color of my line as well, so that I can start to see the difference between these. Change the color of my line and start drawing from the vanishing point to the corners of these things. I'm not going to be precise. You would want to be much more precise than I'm being, but for the sake of time, I don't want to sit here and measure all of these out perfectly. So I'm going to get them in the neighborhood from that vanishing point, which means that I'm not going to have a wholly accurate grid in the end. I might run into some problems if I'm too sloppy later on, but since this is just for an example, I think we'll be alright. So drawing these out, and this will make sure that all of these are the same width descending off in the distance. And that's easy to do. You just draw out the width of them and then use the vanishing point, and it's easy to see how the width of these would diminish. But what about the depth? That's really the question that we're answering here when we put together a grid like we're doing, is what about the depth? The one's way out here to the edge. You're going to see some major distortion on some of these out to the edge once I get there. Let's do one more here. Okay, so I have this right here. Alright, it's easy to tell how they're going to diminish, but how do I accurately start creating lines that show how they get thinner as they go off in the distance? I can't simply guess at it that way. It's not going to be accurate. I want it to be accurate. So the way to do this is to take your station point, and from that I'm going to click and hold shift so that I can create a 45-degree line. And that line is where it touches the horizon becomes a new part. I'm going to use my tool again here to draw this in, and this becomes a measuring point. I can do this to either side as long as it's a 45-degree from the station point to the horizon line. Now again, the further down I'm able to get that station point, the more accurate and the less distorted my grid will be. But again, you're working within the restrictions of your computer. If you have a high-powered computer, you can make a huge canvas. Go with add 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 pixels around the edges if you need to, and get a really accurate grid. But in this case, I'm acting as though this is not the most high-powered computer, which actually it's not. So that's not too difficult to pretend. So anyway, after I've drawn out that measuring point, what I can do is I can use this to determine the width and placement of these horizontal lines that determine if these are perfect square tiles, how they diminish in depth as they go off into the distance. So I'm going to go back to my line tool, and I'm going to choose yet another new color. Let's go with like an intense green, something we can see. And I'm going to draw from that measuring point to the furthest corner of my furthest tile. This will give me an interesting effect, and it will start to show the problems with this method very quickly. So what happens is you'll notice, since I drew from the measuring point, this is intersecting with all of my lines, and that's actually all the information I need to create this sense of depth. Right here, where the first intersection is my first key element. So let's see if I can find, I'm going to choose an even, yet another color. Let's go with like an orange. Orange might work. And where those intersect, I'm going to create a horizontal line on this side and that. Now where they intersect again on the next line, I'll create a horizontal line. I'm holding shift while drawing these lines to make sure they stay horizontal. Same thing where this one intersects. And you can see them already beginning to diminish in depth as they go towards the vanishing point. Now this 45-degree angle only works in one-point perspective this way. There's other ways to do it for different kinds of perspective, like 2-point, etc. This is the method for 1-point. It only works because we are parallel, exactly parallel. or you might even say perpendicular, to these tiles. They are a complete horizontal line when compared to the viewer, and that is necessary for this to work. You can see I'm just kind of drawing from both sides here, following the intersections, and it's giving me this diminishing depth of these tiles. Now eventually they're going to get so thin you can't even see the difference between them. It's just a bunch of lines, but that's expected. That's the same as you see in the real world. The higher my horizon line is, the longer I'm able to see them. If my horizon line was way down here, way low, I would barely be able to see any difference between the tiles at all. And you'll find that's the same. If you crouch down on the floor and you look at a tiled floor, you can barely make out even the first couple of rows of tiles. But if you're looking at them from high up, it's the opposite situation. So I'm putting these together. I'm getting them in the neighborhood. Now I'm getting kind of sloppy because I'm starting to care less and less. Okay. So we'll say that's as far as it goes. I'm creating this. Interestingly, if I tell myself, this is a 1 by 1 foot square, because in truth, I'm not creating a tile floor, I'm creating a grid with which to build anything in Photoshop. If this was a 1 by 1 foot square, that would allow me even to measure out entire rooms. See, everywhere this intersects with this other line, I can even go in here and create walls. If I tell myself, all right, my wall is this tall at this point, I can then draw my line. And everywhere this intersects, I can just go in and create nice, steady, accurate, if I was being more careful, accurate wall grid. I can even do it with the ceiling going across the side. It's very easy then to just frame out a room from here. Now let me talk for just a minute about the distortion. You can see down here, if I zoom out, you can really see it. Here's my overall grid, my station point, my 45-degree line. Now where this 45-degree line ends, right here, you can see where it crosses in the grid. Everything inside of that triangle is going to be more accurate considerably, especially towards the middle. You can see this is very accurate. But then as I start to go off, these start to distort, especially when I get way out here to the edges. So if I was to take it and draw another diagonal line, 45-degree diagonal, just for the purpose of reference, so right here from the station point up to this side, everything outside of that corner is really going to start to see distortion. So if I look at it here, you can see that this does not quite look right. It doesn't really look like a square in perspective anymore. It seems a little flawed, and it is, and that is because of the distortion, because my grid isn't quite big enough. This is not a perfect system. It's an excellent, accurate approximation, but it is not perfect. If I bring the station point down even further, and theoretically it go beneath my feet if the screen would allow it, I could get the most accurate. But because of the limitations of the size of my screen, I can only take it so far. See, I can go in here and I can increase the canvas size pixel-wise to a width of 6,000 and a height of 4,000. And that gives me much more space to work with. And let's say if my station point was down here, a 45-degree line would give me much less distortion because it goes all the way outside of this, all the way outside of my canvas. There's just a little part of the corner down there that's being cut off. So the more space you're able to get, and this crosses my horizon line about up here, so that would be my measuring point rather than what you see right here. That's going to give me more and more accurate perspective. But you can build a grid and have a very, very good idea of how the perspective lays out just with the simple small one that I created on top. But if you have a higher power computer, make your canvas even larger. Give yourself a lot of space around it to work, and you can have highly accurate grids that can be used for anything from illustration to architectural rendering, etc.